Okay, hey, once again doing a bit of a sound check. Luckily this time the mic is set up properly, so that I think you guys should be able to hear me this time. And anyways, we are now at part 6 of Marvel Star Wars 1977. The last one ended on a pretty grim note, considering the fact that they, for the first time, tried to pour some degree of doubt on Luke Skywalker by having him seemingly kill one of his fellow rebels. Only, of course, he had to exonerate himself because he is, the paragon of morality. So now once again, for those of you who want to follow along directly, link in the description to where you can follow the comic. We are now on issue number 64. And at this point, we are in July of 1982, so we're less than a year away from the premiere of Return of the Jedi and the conclusion of what is still one of the great film trilogies in all of history. Let me just get set up, and we can begin properly. Hope you guys are all having a lovely holiday season, only 2 days away from Christmas. Just waiting for this thing to load. Yeah, it's launching. And okay, we're getting there. At any rate, this is going to get a little interesting because, of course, now from here on out, the main focus, once again, it's going to be one of those weird things where it's not really a continuous story, but a lot of storylines are going to be linked. And in this case, it's mostly going to be the focus on finding Han Solo and getting him back before Fett has given him to Jabba. And again, it's because they're never clear with the timing of events here. So it's kind of like wondering, given so much seems to have happened, you'd think Fett would have already delivered his carbonated ass to Tatooine by now. I mean, both Bespin, if you look at a Star Wars map, both Bespin and Tatooine are both in the Outer Rim, and they're even fairly close to each other. They're both in the galactic southwest, I believe. You're looking at a map from above. Just hoping that everybody can hear me this go round, because I would really like to avoid that embarrassment of yesterday where I basically went on for half an hour before someone pointed out in the chat that they could hear the game but not me. Okay, thank you. The sound is good. Oh, hold on. Just got a thing from YouTube. Stream status. I don't know. The stream looks fine to me, YouTube. You're telling me something's up. But so far, everything looks fine. Well, alrighty then. Let us begin, and issue number 64. And welcome back, Mr. Willem Burgle. Are pretty much one of our big recurring viewers here. So then. Issue number 63 is a short little one-off story. And basically the idea is the rebels want to basically bring in a new ally. They want to go to this planet Surfity. I believe that's how you pronounce it based on the spelling. And it's basically a planet of lizard men. Thing is, though, they have reason to believe that most of the people would be perfectly happy to help support the rebellion, but their leader, King Sasha, is pro-imperial. So basically the idea is to send Luke and 2 other pilots, a guy named Burl and a woman named Cinda, to basically get the lay of the land and, if possible, find a way to get the Surfidians on side. So they basically head off, and they just arrive in system right as a bunch of Imperials TIE fighters swoop in. Everybody lives, thankfully, to make it to the surface, although Cinda does have to do a crash landing because her X-Wing was damaged. But that's pretty much where the good news ends, because then they are suddenly attacked by the Surfity. Burl is killed pretty much instantly, while Cinda is captured. Luke is forced to run away because he's outnumbered, and actually, you know, he's given his command of the Force. Would he have been able to take them all down? There's kind of a reason to suspect he might have been. I guess they're sort of doing this for, you know, the sake of trauma. So anyway, as it turns out, King Sasha of the Surfidians is indeed just as bad as the rebel reports turned out to be. In fact, even worse. Because originally, there's this sort of darkly humorous moment where Cinda thinks that that the king basically wants her to be his sex slave, only for the king to be like, "Oh, what? Mate with a monkey like you? No way! I'm gonna eat you." Because apparently the bastard is a full-on cannibal. So good times, good times. Meanwhile, while he's on the run, Luke runs into this old man, old Surfidian man, rescues him from a weird octopus tree thing. And basically, it's from him that he basically gets the backstory. Let me just make sure I've got the old man's name right. Yes, Elgle. Weird name, but, you know, science fiction. Hardly surprising. So, Elgle's story is that long, long ago, the Surfidians were in fact one of the most technologically advanced races in the galaxy. However, advanced tech meant incredibly deadly weapons, so they very nearly destroyed themselves. They don't mention nuclear war, but essentially something on that scale. As a consequence of this, not only did basically all the factions decide to basically band together in a one-world government to try and maintain peace a la Star Trek, they also decided to renounce the advanced technology and sort of regress back to a medieval state, which is why, if you look at the comic, the Surfidians are literally just wearing, you know, old-school medieval outfits, like, you know, knights in knightly armor, European robes and dresses and crowns and stuff. The whole 9 yards. It's almost like watching lizard men LARPing in a King Arthur play. So, so far things went peacefully for a long time. The only thing closest to violence that the Surfidians permitted were regular jousting tournaments as sort of event for their aggression. But then, alas, King Sasha came to the throne, and he basically started breaking a lot of the old taboos and traditions simply because he's an evil asshole. He brought back at least some of the old advanced tech that was forbidden, which is why, even though they're still wielding like medieval-looking weapons like spears and lances, they now shoot out energy beams, which explains the killing of Burl and the capture of Cinda earlier. He's also apparently, Sasha, has basically said the only way that that you can never replace me as king is if you beat me in a death joust. So basically, you know, the tournament, but with the deadly weapons. Elgle, of course, is sick of all the tyranny, and he would very much like to get rid of this tyrant oppressing his people. Unfortunately, he is very, very old. Only stubbornness has kept him going this far. And though initially he wants to take Luke on as his squire, he soon realizes, you know what, not only are you younger and fitter than me, but your skill with the Force might be to your advantage. Fine, I'll have you enter in the tournament on my behalf. You know, a sort of like a he's my champion sort of thing. Of course, Luke does win in the end, because even though Sasha is more experienced at this sort of death jousting thing, Luke's got the Force on his side. But of course, Sasha is an evil scumbag. He doesn't exactly accept defeat with grace, and tries to kill Luke at the last minute. Luckily, Elgle is on the ball and actually kills the bastard before he can try. And so, liberation has come at last to Surfidia. Even though technically Luke won the tournament, damn it, Elgle is now made the new king, and he brings his people onto the side of the Rebel Alliance. It's fairly decent as one-off stories go. The one thing that I take issue with is at the very end, they try to make a song and dance about, oh, how tragic it was that Burl died. But, like, we barely meet the guy long enough to have any idea of who he is as a person before he dies. So, what is the use of trying to, squeeze a bit of tragedy out of his death when there's no tragedy to be had? It does kind of beg the question, does it not? Give me a second. With that, we move on to chapter number 65. Now, and it's, again, to sort of show the weird continuity of the comic, we're not... issue number 64, we have no idea exactly where this is in the timeline, but 65 kind of goes back, kind of skips over to where the main storyline from chapter 63 left off, where Luke basically presents the evidence that he got from the Imperial Data Center proving that Shira Bree, the rebel pilot that he killed during a mission, was in fact an Imperial agent. Because up to that point he was basically a pariah among his fellow rebels, because it was all part of Vader's plan to basically force Luke's, to basically have Luke's allies turn against him, so that supposedly he would have no choice but to join his father and embrace the dark side. Of course, now that he's got the evidence, Luke is exonerated. There is much rejoicing. A few, stick in the muds who are salty about it. However, it soon seems the rebellion has much bigger problems to worry about than simply disgruntled troopers. Before the rebels had set up their new permanent base on the forest world of Arbra, in this, their fancy 70s crystal cave and their new telepathic rabbit alien friends, the Hoojibs, they had a temporary base on this lava planet, Galrath. And in fact, the problem is, one of the rebels discovers, because for whatever reason he took a chunk of rock from that planet with him as a kind of souvenir, and he discovers that through some, Star Trek level techno-babble nonsense, and the crystalline structure of the rock is just such a way that it records images somehow. It would honestly be much more. It would be much better if they just came out and said that the rock is magic. Because Star Wars is science fantasy. Let's make no pretense that this is in any way like hard sci-fi. This is one of the things why, some people give Star Trek a hard time whenever they lapse into techno-babble, explaining, oh, it was reverse the polarity of such and such bullshitium stuff. Anyway, of course, who knows what sort of, important information might have been recorded in the very rocks of the old rebel base on Galrath. So now, the rebels basically have to go back and destroy the base before the Empire finds out. Turns out, though, it was out there. It's a little too late for that. Another returning figure from a previous comic line, Admiral Geel, who was head of the Imperial Armada that Luke helped destroy on the mission where he killed Shira. Because, for whatever reason, Vader was, I guess, feeling a very good mood that day, because he didn't kill him for failing to preserve the fleet. Instead, he's sort of demoted him. So now, Geel is determined to basically do anything he can to regain his rank. He's basically a lieutenant now. Lieutenant, damn it. I've been reading a lot of British fiction lately. That's been getting to me. It's lieutenant. I am not a limey. Thank you very much. So anyway, so basically he's been tasked with sort of this menial task. Like, they don't expect to find anything at the old base on Galrath. And they might not have, except then some stormtroopers who were slacking off on their job, they see what appears to be a horde of rebels attacking them, but it turns out, oh, this was just the funny crystals in the walls of Galrath, revealing what's been going on. And so, immediately, the lieutenant puts two and two together and realizes, oh, who knows what kind of valuable information might have been unwittingly recorded in the rocks. Start taking as much as you can. Meanwhile, the rebels are already launching their attack on their former base. while Luke and his X-Wings engage the Imperial fighters, Leia basically drops in a kind of Mission Impossible-esque infiltration. There's a brief moment where she has a run-in with Gil because, he's no fool, and he basically figures, the rebels the easiest way for the rebels to destroy the base, if that's what they're here for, would be to have the base's reactor overload. So I'm going to get ahead of them. And that's pretty much what happens. Unfortunately, Leia manages to outwit the former admiral. And, damn it. And basically, he's unable to shut off the reactor before it goes critical. So he's got no choice but to run for it along with everybody else. Not this time. However, purely out of spite and frustration, Gil basically shoots at the retreating rebel X-Wings with his hand blaster. He doesn't actually expect it to do anything, but it turns out that he manages to damage Luke's hyperdrive by complete dumb luck. Because now Luke can't escape into hyperspace along with the rest of the rebels. Damn it. And so he basically has to go to ground on one of the other planets in the system just to avoid being caught. And with that, we come over to Chapter 66, The Water Bandits, sort of picking up from where that one leaves off. Sometimes you have to first throw polarity. Yeah, that always seems to be the go-to thing whenever something's wrong with the tech in a Star Trek show. What's it? What's the common thing they're always saying? Dilithium crystals? I'm not a Trekkie, so, anybody who knows more about that than I do is welcome to correct me on that one. So anyway, Luke, initially his plan is, I'm going to hide out here, wait till the Imperial patrols leave, and then just, find a way to repair my X-Wing and rejoin the rebels. Problem is, because of course the plot demands it, a bunch of weird space cave lice have been eating away at his supply, so he can no longer just stay where he is. He has to go into town and look for material, for supplies, parts, all the while avoiding the Imperial patrols because he just doesn't have a choice in the matter. Unfortunately, Luke has just never been very good at subtlety. He tries to basically play off like, I'm just from the north, when he finds like the local equivalent of a general store. But then when he discovers that food he can purchase, but water is very expensive on this world because there have been bandits hitting the local moisture farms, Luke accidentally lets slip working on his uncle's farm on another world. And apparently the locals are really on a hair trigger about this because they figure, wait, his story's not adding up. He must be one of the water bandits, and they try to beat him up. Of course, Luke has learned to handle himself in a fight, but luckily, before the thing escalates too far, one of the moisture farmers, what's her name? Dariel, yes, basically intervenes. And basically, he says, hold on, let me find the exact words. Yes, he's a stranger and that's all we know. For pity's sake, the brigands have taken everything else from us. Water, commerce, sometimes our lives. Let's not let them steal common decency. That's all some of us have left. So, standards, my friend, standards. So at least Luke is able to avoid that problem. And in fact, because he acquitted himself so well in the bar fight, Dariel actually decides to hire him on as sort of extra protection for the moisture farms. Although at first Luke kind of wonders why she would even need him for this. Because Dariel's moisture farm is one of the few left standing that hasn't been raided, and it's literally built like a fortress. There's literally like an outer perimeter wall and then an inner defense line of barbed wire. But apparently that might not be enough, because according to Dariel, The way that the water bandits have always done this is that they come in at night, somehow knock everybody unconscious, and then in the morning, the water's just gone and the equipment has been trashed. And unfortunately for Luke and Dariel, that's pretty much what happens. They're like standing watch, suddenly some weird green cloud appears, they fall asleep, and it's all gone. You know, cue the South Park broker meme, and it's gone. Like the evaporators and the storage tanks have been trashed. The water is completely gone. What's more, Dariel is gone too. And Luke is highly motivated to find and rescue her. And I do like this. It's partly out of a sense of guilt and a chance to square the balance. Luke, in a way, still blames himself for not being there to save Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru from the stormtroopers back in A New Hope. And he figures that, maybe helping Dariel, someone who was in the same line of business as his family, might, in some ways square the scales of justice, as it were. In the end, he does manage to find the bad guy's hideout. Unfortunately, the water bandits are unusually competent, and they actually end up catching him. And so he becomes their prisoner. The leader, let me get his name right, Mr. Gideon Longspar, real asshat he is. It turns out that his secret weapon is the weird green cloud thing. And let me make sure I got what he's called correctly. This thing called the Tirith. It's this weird gaseous anomaly thing. Again, this really feels like the sort of thing that would show up in a Star Trek episode. But the idea is that he's basically got at least part of the Tirith imprisoned inside this vacuum-sealed bottle thing. And basically he sends a part of it out to basically steal the water, because somehow they're able to do that. They, suspend the water inside their whatever weird space magic matrix they've got, and they basically steal it. And basically he threatens, do my job, do my dirty work for me, or I will destroy part of you. And they're the very typical, very gentle alien. They wouldn't really do this of their own free will, but they're not accustomed to violence, so they feel they've got no choice but to go along with Gideon's evil plan. So Luke and Dariel are thrown in a cell together. However, here's where sort of the competency of Gideon Longspar and his goons kind of comes to an abrupt end, because the Tillith, or the part of the Tillith that's free and mobile, figures, hey, these two might be able to help me free myself from this bondage to Gideon, and then I can help them in return. And so basically it helps free Luke and Dariel from their prison. And Luke takes out Gideon, despite the fact that that the guy already has Luke's lightsaber. But he's got no Force training. For him, a lightsaber is about as useful as a butter knife. It's not just the weapon; it's knowing how to use it. Words to live by, if ever there was. So anyway, they end up destroying the tanks where Gideon had stored all the water he's been stealing from the moisture farmers. But the Tillith, again, as sort of gratitude to Dariel and Luke for freeing them from their confinement, uses their weird suspension matrix ability thing to basically contain the water so that they can safely return it to the farmers. They're giving it back because they're very nice creatures at heart. And in fact, not only that, they basically because they don't just store it for them. They basically use it to trigger a rainstorm over the planet, a very dusty planet, not quite as desert-like as Tatooine, but still water is pretty rare. Hence the need for moisture farms. And so, there's the classic scene of everybody, singing and dancing in the rain, cheering, big celebration thing. The sort of thing you kind of expect from a plot line like this. And yeah, that's number 66. Again, pretty standard. But, Luke eventually gets the parts he needs and he leaves. And, gets back to Arbra. Issue 67, another bit of a one-off. The Rebels are going into this because now we're starting to get into what is going to be the main focus of the comics plot line for at least the next couple of issues: the search for Han Solo. So right now, at this point, the Rebels have two, specifically Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewbacca, and the droids have two leads. Well, three leads rather, because apparently in the comic timeline, Fett wasn't just working alone when he snagged Han in order to get that bounty from Jabba the Hutt. He had a partner, but Fett basically cut him out of the deal. Because, bounty hunters are not exactly known for being morally scrupulous individuals. So their hope is that they'll find this former partner and hope that he's, feels cheated enough that he will basically tell them where they can find Fett. Though again, by this point, I have to assume that Fett has managed to get Han delivered to Jabba, so again, and because they're not very clear with the timeline in this comic, and so our three potential leads on who Boba Fett's again, we have three possible options for who Boba Fett's partner is, and so them from the lineup in Empire Strikes Back. They are Bosk the Trandoshan, although apparently, instead of just a bounty hunter, he's described in this comic as Monarch of the Kotile system. So again, this is clearly before they established the lore of the Trandoshan race. IG-88 is the second, and Dengar is the third. And in the comic, he's a cyborg. I plan at some point to do like the Bounty Hunter Wars, where a lot of the other Bounty Hunter characters come into focus. But I don't know if Dengar is a cyborg in later Star Wars material. Well, as far as I knew, he was just a human. If anybody knows if he's still a cyborg in like the later expanded universe, by all means, let me know in the chat. So anyway, while they're discussing this, R2 hears a strange plea for help, and in a rare moment, we basically have a bit of R2's perspective on the matter. They have, got to pause here because the narrator puts it like this: input, audio entreaty, human, range, desperation, nuance. Prescribed action, alert companions. Probable outcome, admonition to stop hearing things. Projected accuracy of peer judgment, 94%. Conclusion, what the heck. It's kind of interesting because, much like Chewbacca, R2 is a character that you never really understand exactly what he's saying. You're supposed to infer it from how the other characters, mostly in this case Luke and 3PO, react to him. And, that's part of the charm, but it's still kind of an interesting idea to, actually have R2 express himself in some ways. If anyone's familiar with William Shakespeare's Star Wars, this fun little book trilogy that was written by this Harvard student who decided, what the hell? I love Star Wars, I love Shakespeare, I'm going to rewrite the original trilogy, and later the prequel and sequel trilogies, into, Shakespearean plays, complete with iambic pentameter. And R2 is basically the only character who breaks the fourth wall. So he actually addresses the audience. So anyway, R2 hears this plea for help, and he decides to go investigate. 3PO notices that he's missing. I believe it's Plisk, the leader of the Hoojibs, informs him of where the R2 unit has gone. And eventually the droid and Chewbacca end up going to find him. They encounter this weird little force field that at first they have a little bit of trouble getting through, and then they find this abandoned city buried within the bowels of the cave on Arbra. And there they find R2-D2 seemingly disassembled. Then they meet this weird green-cowled bastard who calls himself the Darker. Not exactly an impressive name, but hey, given that this guy is able to basically manipulate people's emotional states on a dime, I'm not exactly going to be making fun of him for his name anytime soon. Basically, the story behind this is that once there was this... Again, we have another case of an advanced alien race that lived long, long ago. And one day they decided, we're just going to get rid of all of our base evil impulses. Sort of like if you're a Dragon Ball Z fan, what Kami did to create... and how he ended up creating Piccolo. And basically, they ended up leaving, and so basically they sort of ascended, these weird elder aliens ascended to like a higher plane of existence, having achieved this kind of enlightenment. But of course, the Darker, this manifestation of their evil impulses, was left behind. And, you know, he's been cooling his heels in this cave for God alone knows how many millennia. And at first, the situation is pretty dire. He doesn't really seem to have much of an effect on droids, but he is basically able to manipulate Chewbacca into attacking 3PO. Because, again, this is basically an entity that manipulates emotions. He manipulates Chewbacca's rage. He's able to reverse his courage and make it into fear. And, of course, you know, meanwhile, everybody else has barely noticed the droids have gone missing yet. And, you know, at first they're not worried about it. Meanwhile, 3PO actually sort of comes in clutch here. He manages to free R2 and put him back together, as it were. And he also finds this text that explains the nature of the Darker and how it can be defeated. He finally manages to get through to Chewbacca by reminding him of Han, his closest friend, the one to whom he swore his life debt. And it seems that's enough to break the Darker's hold on him. At first, though, even then, that doesn't seem quite enough, as the Darker is able to just paralyze the Wookiee with fear, even if he can't use him as his puppet. Meanwhile, the Hoojibs, who were originally sort of chased off by also being really, really scared of the Darker, they basically show up and decide to because the Darker's focusing all of his attention on Chewie, he can no longer focus all of his attention on the Hoojibs, and so they sort of come to the rescue and distract him long enough that Chewbacca is able to win free as well, and he ends up throwing the Darker into the barrier, this weird little force field that initially they couldn't get through, because this has been what contains the Darker. He cannot touch it without dying. And that's pretty much what happens. And so, you know, the droids and the Wookiee emerge. You know, they're just glad to be alive. And of course, by this point, Luke noticed them like, oh. Well, no, actually not Luke, but a rebel. Says literally, oh, so there you are. Commander Skywalker's been looking all over for you guys. You better get cleaned up and head over to the hangar bay pronto. Your little vacation's over. And, you know, 3PO is indignant at that. And so that ends chapter 88. At which point we now move on to chapter 89, and we really begin to focus on the search for Han. Because it wasn't just, you know, a one-off thing, the mentioning of this back in, yes. There is, again, this idea where even though there's not exactly a consistent arc, but a lot of stuff is tied together now. And so basically, because they have 3 leads on Han, depending on who Boba Fett's partner was, because they don't know who it is exactly, they split up. Leia and 3PO go searching for Dengar. Lando and Chewbacca go searching for, I believe it's Bosk, and while Luke and R2 will go try to find IG-88. And so we first follow Leia and 3PO. And here's the funny part. They end up on, of all places, Mandalore. So this technically makes it the very first appearance in all Star Wars media of the Mandalorians. Because, you know, again, this is one of the things that were like, I originally thought that yes, I knew that the Mandalorians, that the word Mandalorian had existed at least since like the Empire Strikes Back, because that was stuff like that was mentioned in the original script for the film, but you know was left out because it wasn't really relevant. But like they don't really start fleshing out Mandalorian culture as we would recognize it until like the Tales of the Jedi comic in the 90s, which I have covered. an excellent comic book series, if I may say so. However, anyway, Leia ends up running into, I guess, well, hold on, let me make sure I've got this right. Oh, yes, so, Leia and 3PO are on Mandalore looking for leads on Dengar. And suddenly they spot a bunch of slavers. And so, basically, because for our heroes, the lowest scum in the Star Wars galaxy. However, suddenly the slavers are attacked by a bunch of people led by a man wearing the exact same armor as Fett. And so at first Leia is confused. She has no idea if this is Fett or just someone wearing a similar armor. Turns out it is the latter. Let me make sure I got this guy's name right. A fellow by the name of Fen Shissa or Shisa, I don't know. And one of the funny little details they decide to add here is that, how earlier in one of the earlier arcs, they had like the Ugnaughts they decided to give them accents to some people, like the Ugnaughts were Scottish, and the weird guys on that one junkyard planet Luke and Lando went to were Russian. Well, apparently in old Marvel Star Wars, Mandalorians are Irish. Just the way that the words are spelled, it's clear they're basically Irish. Yes. And so Fen basically explains the situation to Leia that the Mandalorians have these elite figures known as the Mandalorian Guardians, and they fought on the side of the Republic during the Clone Wars. Or was it the Empire? Well, yeah, at this point they haven't yet established that the Republic transitions into the Empire. Let me just make sure I've got this right. Okay, yes, the Mandalorians did fight for the Empire because again, they haven't yet established, in the prequel stuff, that the Republic transitions into the Empire. It's described, prequel haters again gnash their teeth. But, the way they describe it in this version, it seems like the Empire was almost like an uprising against the Republic, and, they won. So the Mandalorians were sent to fight for the Empire. However, so many were lost, only 3 of them returned. Fen Shisa, I'll go with that. Fen Shisa, Boba Fett, and, darn it, what's the third guy's name? Let me find his name. Toby Dalla. They were the only 3 Mandalorian Guardians to survive the war. And, only Mandalorian Guardians wear the fancy, distinctive armor. It seems that Fett became so that the loss of so many of his fellows left Fett so disillusioned that he basically decided, I'm done fighting for others. From now on, if I'm going to fight, it'll be only for myself and my own gain. And that's how why he became a bounty hunter. Yeah, Boba Fett's backstory really would remain quite inconsistent for a long time. I don't think it was... even before the prequels, there was another backstory that he had that was sort of retconned post Attack of the Clones. I believe they did find a way to incorporate that, though, into the whole him being him still being like the clone of Jango. Anyway, good news. The Mandalorians are friendly, and even to Leia and 3PO. And even better news, they've got Dengar as their prisoner. Bad news, they have no intention of giving Dengar to Leia because they are they're fighting with the Empire and the slavers on this world. Well, because of course the Empire is working with the slavers, and they're planning to trade Dengar in exchange for the other Mandalorian Guardian, Toby Dalla. Now, of course, Dengar is eager to get out of his cage that they've literally put him in. So he basically like, hey, lady, let me out of here. I'll tell you where you can find Boba Fett. And so, Leia is very desperate to find Han. So in the end, though, it really tears her up inside to go against someone who's been nothing but friendly and courteous to her. She basically goes behind Fenn's back to free Dengar. Of course, Dengar decides to double-cross them because he immediately recognizes who Princess Leia is, and he manages to signal the Empire to pick them up, as it were. So much for that plan. The slavers end up taking Leia and 3PO off to their hideout, which is pretty cool, I must say. It's literally built into a giant skeleton, like the skeleton of a giant animal. It's never identified as a mythosaur, though, which would be appropriate. Because, I believe they introduced the mythosaur back in the holiday special, because that's the thing that Boba Fett is riding in the animated sequence. So they basically are. So the slavers' hideout. They're dragged before this weird-looking bastard, who calls himself the Suprema. This weird purple lizard dog man. Like I said, there are a lot of weird aliens in Star Wars. Now, luckily, it seems. Fen Shaisa is not quite 2 steps behind as Leia might have thought, because he actually has already managed to follow her to the slaver base disguised as a stormtrooper. The classic ploy. Of course, he's here to get his friend Toby back. And, in fact, at one point it seems Toby has already escaped his cell, and he almost attacks Fen because, he's still wearing the stormtrooper getup. So, at first it seems all is well. They'll be able to make their escape from the slavers. They even managed to take Dengar prisoner at one point, only for him to reveal that he actually has no idea where Fett is, that he wasn't Fett's partner in the arrangement to get Solo. He just said that to get himself a chance of escaping from the Mandalorian's custody. Alas, brave Toby Dalla is fatally injured by the Suprema. And so he basically manages to set the slaver hideout to blow itself up, because of course these places always have self-destruct switches. Meanwhile, Leia, Fen, and 3PO manage to free the slaves and get them out of there before the whole place goes kaboom. Meanwhile, so, Leia's disappointed. Let me make sure I got this right. It's a victory, but it is a qualified one. They have freed the slavers. Well, they freed the slaves, but the slavers have been dealt a blow, but they're not down and out completely, so the fight will still go on. And of course, there is no lead on Han. Luckily for Leia, somewhere else in the galaxy, Chewie and Lando think they might have found a lead, and that's how Chapter 69 ends, and we go on to Chapter 70, where we continue the search for Han. Excuse me. However, before we do that, there's kind of a backstory thing involved. So in Chapter 70, we open up with Lando having rejoined, and Chewie having rejoined Luke and R2, because it turns out that Bosk and IG-88, the other 2 potential partners of Boba Fett, were both seen on this planet called Stenos. So they figure, hey, 2 for the price of 1. We can get them both. There's a chance that we might get some answers after all. Now, where is the other drone? But so anyway, But as they head in towards Stenos, though, Luke decides that, because it turns out that they've been here, that Luke's been there before. And again, we sort of backtrack a ways to back shortly after, supposedly, he and Han had recently joined the rebellion. And so, Luke's worried about what they might find on this planet when they get there. So, as the story goes, so basically the whole gang was there. It was Leia, Han, Chewie, Luke, and the droids. And so they're basically looking for something because there was a rebel base on Stenos, and they haven't reported in. So they're basically there to figure out what happened. The inhabitants of Stenos are called the Stenaxes, and they're basically gargoyles. They sort of look, they're sort of spiky, they've got the horns, and they have big bat wings. They find the old rebel base, which is built into an abandoned Stenaxes temple. Hold on. But as they're looking, they're suddenly ambushed by a trio of criminals who are old acquaintances of Han Solo. Not friends by any means, because, they're very hostile to each other. Let me get their names. Rick Duel is a human, Chido, a Rodian, and Danny, a Zeltron. So this is actually the first time that the Zeltron species makes its debut in Star Wars. For those unfamiliar with the term, Zeltrons are basically red-skinned near humans, and I mean like bright red. And the thing about them is that they are kind of like the Betazoids from Star Trek in that they are very empathic. They're able to, they are very emotional, very expressive, and they can also read and manipulate the emotions of others. The big difference, what's sort of really big difference between them and the Betazoids is that Zeltrons are also very, very, very passionate, almost to the point of being horny on main. They wouldn't actually go horny on main because Star Wars doesn't go in for that kind of doesn't quite go in for that kind of sexual stuff. But if it did, a lot of Zeltrons would be horny on main. And so Danny and this is proven in that Danny immediately takes a liking to Luke and basically starts hitting on him big time. And of course, the kid straight off the farm from Tatooine isn't exactly used to that. At first, there's a bit of a standoff, blasters drawn, but then Rick reveals to Han that he and his allies have been recruited by the rebellion to also find out something that was left behind when the rebels evacuated, because they're not there. The base is abandoned, and apparently it's an ancient religious artifact. A small stone sculpture of one of the Stenaxes gods called Vol. Apparently, the rebel leadership on Stenos figured that, hey, according to old Stenaxes prophecy long ago, Vol cursed them to never fly again until his idol was recovered. And apparently, so Rick tells it, the rebel leaders figured, hey, if we can the rebel leader on Stenos figured, hey, if we can find the statue and recover the Stenaxes god, we can get them on our side. So, win-win. Big time. Unfortunately, the Empire started snooping around, and the rebels had to pull out, but they basically, since Rick and company are sort of more the smuggler type, they could look for the idol of Vol without attracting Imperial suspicion. And eventually, after a lot of searching and 3PO deciphering hieroglyphics that provides them a clue, they actually do manage to find the statue of Vol. However, it's pretty clear, to anyone watching, that Rick has been lying through his teeth the whole time, and that he's just been using the rebels to get specifically our heroes, to get his hands on the idol so that he can sell it to the local Imperial official for a fortune, because apparently this particular Imperial higher-up really likes his artifacts. So, of course, they managed to get their hands on the statue. However, in anticipating this, the Rhodian Chido went into town beforehand and informed the Stynaxes, hey, someone's found your god and they're going to desecrate it and steal it away. So the Stynaxes show up and they're really, really angry. Oh, wait, let me make sure I have this bit right. Of course, at this same time, the stormtroopers arrive because they've been tipped off to the rebels as well. And so, initially, the Stynaxes and the stormtroopers are fighting each other. Luckily, our heroes are able to establish that, hey, we didn't steal your god. And, Rick and his cronies are about to slip away, but it seems the Imperial officer is a lot cleverer than they gave him credit for, because he's already there and basically he's got guns pointed at their face and say, I'll have my artifact, thank you. However, thanks in part to some quick thinking from Han, the Stynaxes now know that the Imperials and the Rick and his fellow cronies have the idol, and so they descend on them right as the Millennium Falcon leaves the planet. So, our heroes came out of it all right, but, Luke's still not keen on seeing Stennis again, because who knows what kind of trouble they could be in for this go-around. Because, again, this whole chapter was backstory. And so, moving on to chapter 71, we arrive on Stennis proper. Now, initially, Lando and Luke decide to go into town by themselves because an R2 unit and a Wookiee stand out a little too much. However, Luke is surprised to see that Stennis has changed a good deal since he and the others left. For one thing, the Stynaxes, now that their god has been found and the curse has been lifted, they're back to living in the spires, these rocky spires, rather than walking on the ground like everybody else. And in fact, the Stynaxes don't seem to give a damn what Offworlders do as long as they don't screw with them. And so there's now a bustling communities forming on Stennis. They're not all humans and, foreign aliens and such. So at first, things are going all right. They think that they are going to they'll be able to track down Bosk and IG-88 and get some answers as to where Han might be, where Boba Fett is. Unfortunately, there's a brief problem when they run into a guy who accuses Lando of having cheated him at cards a couple of years ago. Apparently this guy really holds a grudge. And everyone is they're forced to flee for their lives. And the guy who's after them is like literally this obnoxious, sort of overweight-looking asshole called a Drebel, I believe. So, real, extremely annoying dirtbag. Let me see. Unfortunately, although Luke and Lando manage to escape, they get separated. And Luke ends up running into Rick Duel, the guy whom he ran into however many, years or so ago. Because, we're post-Hoth now. So let me quickly check. What are, in the Star Wars timeline, the years? Battle of Hoth. Battle of Hoth, 3 ABY. Okay. And when was the Battle of Endor? and that's 4 ABY. So we're somewhere between 3 and 4 years following the Battle of Yavin. And, you know, if according to Luke, the first encounter with Rick and his friends on Stenos was right after they joined the rebellion, it would be soon after Yavin. So this has been like 3 or 4, almost 4 years. Oops. However, this time it seems Rick is alone, at least initially. Luke is separated from Lando. Oh, but of course, you know, Dani's still with Rick, and she still really, really wants Luke. Like, again, if Star Wars were a more sexual kind of IP, this woman would be wanting to take him to bed right then and there. Because again, particularly this early phase of like their development as a species, Zeltrons are the closest thing that a galaxy far, far away ever gets to being horny on main. And for some reason, I like that joke, horny on main. It's weird, but for some reason, it's just funny to say. Whoops. So basically, Rick is looking for Chido, the Rhodian, who is part of his crew, because he's gone missing. And, you know, he says he's willing to let bygones be bygones if Luke will help him find the Rhodian. Apparently, back when they were under attack by the Stynaxes focused on killing the Imperials because the officer happened to be holding the idol of Vol at the time. So they figured, you know, he was responsible. And so, you know, some fast talking on Rick saved him, Dani, and Chido from getting lumped in with the Imperials. But, you know, obviously after, you know, double-crossing them the last time, Luke doesn't trust this guy any further than he can throw him. Though I guess, you know, Luke can throw someone pretty far with the Force these days, but I'm assuming we're talking in the throw in the physical sense. But separated from Lando, Luke feels he doesn't have much choice but to go along with Rick. However, just as he got separated from Lando, he suddenly gets separated from Rick, but he runs into Lando again, so that's good, and they see a big carbonite slab being hauled off down the street. And they figure it's gotta be Han. And so they calm the Falcon to let Chewie and R2 know that Han Solo's been found. You know, at last the search is over. Yeah, right. But it turns out the slab of carbonite holds not our favorite Corellian smuggler, but Chido, Rick Duel's Rhodian pal. Yeah. Because this was all bait for a trap laid by the very bounty hunters that Luke and Lando were trying to find, Bosk and IG-88. So yeah, that's not good. Luckily, Rick and Dani find Luke and Lando very quickly on their own. And we have a bit of a firefight at first, but the four of them are outnumbered by Bosk and IG-88's goons. Lando and Dani get captured, but Lando and Luke try to... Luke and Rick, I should say, damn it, try to manage to escape. Unfortunately, it's too late to try and contact Chewie and R2 to warn them away. They've already left the Falcon in order to join Lando and Luke, so they end up going into town. And like one of the reasons that they wanted Chewie to stay behind was because one, a Wookiee stands out pretty big in a crowd, and two, the last time that Chewbacca was on Stenos, the Stynaxes did not react kindly to his presence for some reason. Maybe I don't know what's the word for something like how you would end it. You would end it phobic. What would be like fear of fur? Maybe that's why. No. And in fact, at one point, Chewbacca has a run-in with another Stynaxes and basically beats the crap out of him because, again, he's a Wookiee and there are very, very few species that can actually go toe-to-toe with such a man. Well, you know, Chewbacca's a man. He's just not a human man. Yeah. There's actually a sort of a funny scene at one point where Dani tries to pull the whole seduction game on one of her guards, but apparently this particular bounty hunter is wise to the kind of effects that Zeltrons can have on people and just, you know, almost but not quite bitch slaps her. But at which point Dani decides, okay, we're playing hardball then, and she basically kicks his ass. You know, Zeltrons may be lovers rather than fighters, but, you know, fighting is always an option. It's just not their first option. Unfortunately, so, you know, Lando and Dani managed to escape their guard. Unfortunately, Bossk anticipated this, and essentially they end up running right into a room with a carbonite freezing chamber. Because Bossk figured, well, I knew you'd escape, so I made sure that, you know, all the guard patrols and stuff would basically guide you right where I want you. Whoops. Luckily, Rick and Luke arrived just in time to save them from being shoved into the carbonite freeze, followed by Chewie and a bunch of angry Stynaxes. Because apparently, Chewbacca kicking so much ass, he's managed to sort of win some kind of position of authority over the Stynaxes, and he basically says, you know, help me find my friends. And so they did. It's a bit of a pulled out of left field, but it's not bad. And the Stynaxes have a cool old gargoyle look, so I'm fine with that. And funnily enough, though, at the end of the chapter, it seems that Dani's decided to ditch Rick for a while and hang with, you know, Luke because, you know, she thinks he's cute. Oh man, we're really blitzing through these chapters. There's chapter 73 we're on now, and it's kind of it's sort of a weird, funny chapter because it's mostly essentially a cat fight of sorts between Leia and Dani. Because, you know, at this point they've reunited with Leia. Alas, Bossk and IG-88 have proven to be just as much dead ends as Dengar was. And of course, Leia's temper isn't helped by the fact that Dani is just all over Luke every chance she gets. And what's more, they've had to put the search for Han on hold because the Rebel Alliance wants them to infiltrate this base on, what is the name of the planet? Lazbane, to find some important data tapes. Because they happen to be nearby at the time. But, you know, at this point, I mean, Leia is having a much harder time retaining her, like, icy self-control. She is very much wanting to get Han back. But, you know, she is nothing if not a slave to duty, as they say. And so, you know, she says, fine, we'll put the search on hold for now. Unfortunately, while there are locals on the Lazbees, they're these like cute little furry gremlin aliens. They're kind of like the Keebler elves if they were only with fur. But they're not really any help at all. All they do is just stand there and giggle at Dani as she basically, as Luke tries in vain to like peel her off of him. It's kind of one of those weird things that's played for comedy. And so, you know, the Lazbees just spend their time snickering like children. It also doesn't help that the Lazbees are apparently very anti-advanced tech. Ooh, damn it, I always overshoot with those. So anyway, Leia's kind of in a very, very bad mood. And she's still really grumpy about everything. The Falcon isn't going anywhere because it was damaged during their land. Well, no, it sort of stopped functioning after they landed. Something's going on. Lando has no idea what's wrong, so they can't find Han, and they don't seem to be having much luck in getting the tapes they were there to send. So they can't even complete the mission. And, unfortunately, Leia's kind of gotten to the point where she's even sort of taking it out on Luke, even though she knows full well that he is not doing anything to encourage Danny. She's just all over him because, again, at this point, Zeltrons are just horny on main. And, of course, at this point, she ends up getting into a bit of a spat with Danny, and they sort of egg each other on to the point where, like, oh, you think you're so useful? Fine, well then how about we go sneak into this base where the Imperials hold the data tapes and get them back ourselves tonight. 3PO tries to get them to calm down, but alas, it's no good. And so they sneak in using these little balloons, because apparently that's low tech enough that the Lasbies have no problem with it. And at first, things go well. It's kind of like played for laughs, like stuff almost goes wrong, but it just goes well enough. Like at one point, they actually see an Imperial patrol there. And basically, Danny distracts them with kind of the closest thing that you'll ever get in Star Wars to a striptease. She just removes her jacket, so it's just her skin tight jumpsuit, and poses for all the guys. And it works. It distracts them long enough for Leia to snag sort of like a little balloon thing, and that's how they get to the city. Once again, I sort of ran ahead of myself. I misspoke. The place where the city is where the data tapes are stored, but it's not controlled by the Empire. It's just this old forbidden city that the Lasbies don't go in because it's full of advanced tech. Why the rebels would leave them, why those tapes would be there, no idea, but the rebels think they're useful. They want them, and so that's what they go in for. Unfortunately, meanwhile, back at the Falcon, good news, they do discover that the reason the Falcon has had so much trouble is because some local pollen has gotten into the intakes. And that's sort of why the ship can't take off. So they're able to fix that at least. Meanwhile, while Luke, by this point though, Luke and Lando learn from 3PO what the two ladies are doing. And so Luke goes off to try and help them while Lando focuses on clearing up the ship. Unfortunately, they discover something very awkward about the Lasbies while they're waiting on Luke and the girls' return. It turns out that when Lasbies mature, because those little furry Keebler elves are sort of the juvenile phase, so when they fully mature, they turn into these giant wolfman hulking things, and they're like really hyper aggressive and nasty. And so it's and they're one of the few races that are actually powerful enough to physically overpower Chewie. So things are not looking good for our heroes. At least not at first. Luckily, it turns out that the Lasbies don't like technology merely for cultural reasons. They don't like it because they're especially susceptible to energy weapons. It doesn't kill them, but like even the mildest blast from a pistol is enough to stun them. And so again, they're really adverse to this. Like I said, they're practically allergic to tech. And luckily, when Luke arrives, he finds Leia and Danny being pursued by several adult Lasbies, but luckily he just knocks them all out with a few well-placed shots from his blaster. And so, it's pretty quick, all's well that ends well. The Lasbies are happy to see the back of the strangers with their weird technology, because again, technology is cringe to them. However, Danny gives them the slip, because in the Forbidden City there weren't just the tapes, but a boatload of treasure, and she swipes the the Imperial ship and decides to, rejoin her comrades Rick and Chido. Hopefully by now the guy's been freed from the carbonite. Neat. So far the stories are sort of like just short little fun vignettes. Nothing nearly as good as the storyline with Shira Bree, or the whole bit with the Third Law, where Leia and Vader were basically doing mind games with one another on this banking planet. And so we come to sort of I believe it's a trilogy, if not a duology, the Iskalon arc. So basically, once again, the search for Han has to be put on hold because I'm actually going to look that up exactly why they're there. Hold on a moment. Sorry, guys. Okay, the reason they're there is to basically help the locals of Iskalon in a struggle against the Empire. Once again, our heroes are the closest in proximity, and while the rebel leadership assures them that, while they're doing this, they'll send other people to keep a lookout for Fett and any leads on Han, Leia is kind of really discouraged. She really is kind of tired of all these constant diversions from the quest for, the man she loves. But, Luke, and, for once, it's Luke who has to remind her that, our fight is against tyranny. We have to help all victims, not just the ones that we know or when it's convenient for us. It's kind of a nice little moment. Shows how much he's grown. So anyway, they meet one of the locals. Hang on. What's his name? Darn it. Sorry, guys. It's so hard to keep track of this stuff sometimes. Drat. I'm sorry, guys. I just did not expect things to get this far. So, and stuff's getting really confused, and I can't get all the information on me at the moment. So I'm gonna have to cut this stream a little short. Or we'll resume the day after Christmas, because it's the holidays. Can't take time out for that. So in the meantime, I hope you guys are all well. I hope you enjoy the holidays with your family, and Merry Christmas.